This is David Gray, Mandan, North Dakota. Today's June 29th, 2022. Today we'll discuss the problem of scale and how it factors into a government's ability to effectively operate and meet the needs of its population. In lectures, Dr. Livingston presented concepts of governmental scales articulated by the philosophers Aristotle, Althusius, Hume, and Thomas Hobbes. Dr. Livingston noted that the foundational period of the United States and later, most Americans adhered to one of the tenets of one or more of these philosophers. Dr. Livingston concluded all supported representative government to one extent or another. They advocated small political entities which may federate to form larger states or evolve or secede or rejoin other federations as they choose. However, only Thomas Hobbes favored a large, centralized, authoritative state. Dr. Livingston also concluded that the Hobbesian point of view eventually prevailed in American history, as demonstrated by the conflict and outcome of the American Civil War. It's interesting to note how scholars in our own age view the matter of governmental scale. Robert Dahl in 2005 wrote an article, What Political Institutions Does Large Scale Democracy Require? Published that in the Political Science Quarterly in 2005. Robert Dahl focuses on the political institutions of democracy on a large scale and the political institutions necessary for a democratic country. He asks the questions, how can citizens participate effectively when the number of citizens becomes too numerous or too widely dispersed geographically? And what does it mean to say a country is governed democratically? He answers those questions with large scale democracy requirements. And they're delineated here elected officials, free, fair, frequent government or elections, freedom of expression, alternative sources of information readily available. And he's referring to the media. Associational autonomy, he's referring to political parties, and inclusive citizenship. How do you make large scale democracies work? Dahl says the only feasible solution, though it is highly imperfect, is for citizens to elect top officials and hold them more or less accountable, and by dismissing them in subsequent elections if they prove to be subpar. To us, that solution's rather obvious. In 1999, Felipe Schmitter wrote an article, The Future of Democracy Could Be a Matter of Scale, which is the title of this presentation. Schittimer examines the relationship between the future of European democracy and its ability to adapt to changes in the scale of the economic, cultural, and social relations of its citizens. He concludes the full democratization of Europe depends upon the redesigning of European Union practices of citizenship and representation through slow implementation of reform models of democracy. I think what we see here are rather optimistic outlooks for the future of large scale democracies. But what's going on in the United States? I looked at a Congressional Research Service report published in 2020 on the size of the House of Representatives. The report it just gives a real basic history. And of course, there's 435 seats. This number has been constant since the start of the 63rd Congress in 1913. The Permanent Appropriations Act of 1929 confirmed the 1913 legislation that established the number of seats at 435, and which, of course, are apportioned based on population. This remains the law of the land. Surprisingly, there have been few proposals related to House size in the House since the turn of the 20th century. And of course, we know that changing the number of representatives can only ensure certain states will change or lose existing seats. The report concludes with a 2018 Pew Research study that found a plurality of Americans thought the House size should remain at the same at 435. I, for one, don't think so. This report includes this chart. It's shocking to see that the number of representatives in the House has not changed since 1913, when the population of the United States was approximately 100 million people. Today, the population is 329 million, more than three times greater than what it was when it was capped in 1913 at 435 representatives. I suggest this represents a poorly scaled chamber for the House of Representatives relative to the population of the United States. For instance, I live in North Dakota. We have two senators and one representative for the House of Representatives. Doesn't that seem a bit lopsided? Today, on account of relatively low population, Alaska, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, and Delaware only have one representative in the U.S. House. In the interest of all the states, I suggest the number of members of the U.S. House of Representatives be increased. By how many, I don't know. I don't have the research or a formula. I only suggest that the American people, numbering over 300 million strong, are underserved by a cap of 435 members in the U.S. House of Representatives. Thank you for your time.